Hello and welcome to the Happier Life Project podcast, brought to you by the free, award-winning mental health and wellness app, My Possible Self. I'm usually your host, Gabby Sanderson, but today we're doing things a bit differently because I will be in the guest chair. So last October, I had the pleasure of interviewing Risa Williams, a psychotherapist, time management coach, author, and host of the award-winning productivity podcast, The Motivation Mindset, which, by the way, you should definitely add to your subscription list. Now, our episode was titled Time Management Techniques, Reduce Stress, Anxiety and Overwhelm with Risa Williams. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet of the pod, I highly recommend you checking out. Risa and I stayed in touch after the episode, and she invited me to be a guest on her podcast to talk about my experience with hustle culture and burnout. As we got into our conversation and I shared my personal story with her, Risa mentioned how common these struggles are, which is why she wrote a book about it. Well, that book came out today, February 11th, if you're listening to this episode on its release day. Get Stuff Done Without Stress is a time management book that shares 5 key secrets for organising your time, managing stress, and mastering your focus. It's a practical guide anybody can use in their daily life, and it's available now on Amazon and other book retailers. When I listened back to our interview, I realised just how much great advice Risa had given me. So I asked her, could I share the conversation here on the Happier Life Project? She very kindly agreed, and I'm very excited to bring it to you today. In this episode, we dive into hustle culture and how easy it is to get sucked into that fast-paced grind. I open up about my mental health and how it took a really bad turn for the worst after pushing myself too hard at work, how it led to burnout and a panic disorder diagnosis, and why it's so important for us to slow down on purpose. We recorded this interview a few months ago now, and since then, I have taken Risa's advice. I recently made the tough decision to step away from a big project that I refer to in the interview. Don't worry, it's not this podcast. It was a scary choice, but I'm confident I made the right one. So, without further ado, here's the fantastic Risa Williams interviewing me on her podcast, The Motivation Mindset, here on the Happier Life Project podcast.
Gabby Sanderson, thank you so much for joining me today on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
And Gabby is a DJ, a writer, a journalist, and she also hosts the Happier Life Project, which is a very popular podcast in the UK and all over Europe. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's been a labor of love, like podcasts are, as you know, for the past 3 years. And it basically came from, I was working in the US, a producer for Apple Music, and I got approached by this mental health and wellness app in the UK, which is where I'm from, called My Possible Self. And I really loved the passion behind it from the family that have created the app, and just also the sincerity of it too, because, for example, they were charging, but then when the pandemic hit, they made a decision, right, okay, we want to make sure that we can let people access the app and all of the content because it's all clinically certified. They're partners with the Priory Healthcare, which are, I think, the UK's main private healthcare provider for mental health, I should say. So so all the content is clinically certified, and they said, well, with everything that's going on, we're in a mental health crisis too. So we're going to make the app free. And then they've kept it that way. And there's a lot of users that are on the app and that listen to the podcast.
Mhm.
So yeah, I've learned a lot in 3 years and I'm
That's
still
so
learning.
cool. And I was so lucky to be on the show with you. It was so much fun talking about time management. And I know you talk to people about a wealth of subjects. And today on the show, we're talking about hustle culture and burnout and how it can affect us. And I know you've lived in so many different places. How
Mm.
have you found hustle culture to be in different places that you've lived?
Well, you're not going to be surprised when I say that I found it hardest in the States.
I believe it.
And that's when I first experienced what I now know was a panic attack. At the time, I really thought it was a heart attack. And I phoned my sister, who is in the other side of the world, just to let her know that, this might be the last time we speak. I was convinced. I'm smiling about it now because
Yeah.
obviously I know so much since about the symptoms of a panic attack and how you do feel like you're having a heart attack. And that's all very common. But at the time it was, horrendously scary. So, but yeah, that trigger was from pushing myself too much. And I suppose just getting sucked into the hustle culture, which part of it is obviously for financial reasons. But then the other part is that, it's about getting more and achieving more and keeping up with everybody else, basically.
I call it a nonstop hamster wheel of stress that you just feel like you have to keep going and going and going and you're never done. So I'm just curious from an outsider point of view, why is it so bad here? I mean, obviously, as someone who's here, I feel it. And most of the clients I speak to each week feel it. They feel that pressure, that kind of like American dream pressure to go, go, go. But it's also sort of in the work environments here. Like it constantly feels like you're never doing enough. And how does that compare to other places?
Yeah, well, I will say that, America is also a very big country and also experienced it in the UK. And even now in Portugal, I'm entering a more like a corporate kind of workspace again. And again, I'm becoming more aware of it is very similar everywhere. It's not, but I suppose America is more known for it because of that whole American dream thing. And I don't know, maybe it's just like any kind of trend that takes off. But you've also got like the biggest companies in the world. Like, for example, I work for Apple, and that was very challenging for me with my mental health because of the hours, basically. Just feeling like you had to be replying to emails at 11 o'clock at night because everybody else did, and you were less than if you didn't. And it was never directly said. And I'm sure if I flagged it, then, management would have said, oh, no, 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 no. It was just that
sort of
kind
an
of
unstated pressure,
exactly.
I find. Nobody is admitting it, but there is this problem we have sometimes in America, and I'm sure in other places, where we don't know how to shut off work mode. We just are in work mode all the time. The end of the day comes and there's no division between stopping work. Oh, it's time to be with my family, or now I can relax on the couch, or now I have free time. It's sort of just always going. You always want to check your phone. You're always worried you're going to miss something. And I write about it in my new book because I think it's important that people compartmentalize things. And maybe in other cultures, they do this more naturally. There's more of a stop point at the end of the day or on the weekends. Okay, I'm done. I'm done with work. Whereas here, I find, especially in Los Angeles, people just work all the time. They're always checking. They're always sort of on guard for the email or the text or something,
Well, if you work remotely as well, and if you work with international clients, then I think about a friend is working here in Portugal, but she's working US hours. So, I mean, she's made that decision, like nobody's making her do it, but then it does come with its sort of challenges when your times are different. And I think of like one of my best friends as well, who lives in Dublin, and she's a high achiever and successful, but it seems like it comes with the territory. That means you've always got to be on and you've always got to be putting out fires no matter what time it is.
Right. Do you think some of it is the expectations we set for ourselves to be at this level of high performance all the time? And then we feel like we need to keep that up. We can't drop that expectation, after it's been set.
Yeah, I think for me, I, without realizing it, have been influenced by people like who I look up to as well, but like my friend that I told you about, because she's doing so well in work, and she's also a mom. She's got 2 kids, and she's always, I barely ever speak to her.
Mhm.
And I really miss speaking to her because we, went to university together and very close. Sometimes I have to stop myself and go, but hang on a minute, like the work-life balance. She's constantly ill or exhausted, or I get like a note saying, I'll call you as soon as I can. And I know that she means it genuinely, but it definitely is a factor now in terms of like when I think about my career and what I want to do. And I know that I could have gone down a different path and maybe gone more into like producing, but then what you have to sacrifice to be able to be successful, and me knowing what toll it took on my mental health when I did go down that route a bit. For me personally, it's not worth it.
Yeah. Because at what cost, right? Everything comes at a cost. And when you put that much effort into the work part of your life, often the other parts of your life get way off kilter and off balance. And over time, that causes burnout. That causes us to just feel exhausted and maybe reach that level of existential questioning where like, what is the point of all this? I've run my body and brain into the ground.
1,000,000%. And I've been there twice.
Yeah. So how did you pull yourself out of hustle culture and back into balance again?
Well, I had my first panic attack, and then I don't think I had another one until a few months later. But I went back to the UK just because the radio station that I was working for at the time closed down. So I went back home and I thought, well, maybe I should get more of a proper job. So I took a job in a PR firm in Manchester. But then I didn't want to let go of the radio completely. So I was doing radio on the weekends. And then I thought, well, getting ahead and climbing up the career ladder, I'll do a master's in digital marketing at night school.
So you added more stuff.
Yeah. So, and then then it started. It would creep up at night where my heart would just start going, or I'd feel like I was being choked. And it got to the point where one day I got on a train and went back to my old hometown to the doctors and said, look, I think there's something wrong with my heart, because I just wasn't sleeping. My hair was falling out because of the stress. I mean, it was just,
goodness.
Yeah, it was terrible. And then I got really lucky. I had a fantastic doctor who used to be a psychiatrist. So he was very informed on mental health. And then we, started talking, and he was like, anybody in your situation would, be reacting like this. This is not healthy. What are you doing? So he signed me off work for a couple of weeks, and work did not take it well at all, because I was doing really well at work. I was getting all the clients and, doing all the right things, hitting the targets. So they didn't act very compassionately. And that made my anxiety worse.
Yeah.
I got diagnosed with an anxiety disorder because of the panic attacks and the high level of stress and everything. So I had to leave the job. Yeah, I got a new opportunity in the US, and then I just went for a kind of fresh start back in America. Ended up working for iHeartMedia. Yeah, so it taught me a lot, but wouldn't recommend it.
Well, that's sometimes what happens. We do hit a rock bottom with our own anxiety and burnout, to the point where we pull back out of the matrix and we can really see, what am I doing to myself? I'm overloading myself. I'm pushing myself too hard. And on top of it, the people I'm working for aren't all that empathetic or compassionate. And so then you can pull back and get that perspective and sort of realize, I need to do things differently if I want a different outcome. I know I've hit that point many times in life where I just accidentally started overloading myself and trying too hard, and then adding more stuff on my plate and throwing myself way off balance, to the point where now I'm so hypersensitive about balance. Like I can feel it out more, the nuances of it, when I start heading that direction, because I've tipped myself so far to one extreme in the past, that now I'm a little bit more aware, I think, when I take new projects on, or say, do I really have energy, to do this, to add this? And so often of the time we're doing it to ourselves. Nobody's telling us we have to do all this stuff. It's sort of like we're not examining as we're taking all the stuff on, how much is really too much for us.
I'm trying to figure this out right now because I have taken on a big project, which is definitely more than I thought it was going to be. And bandwidth wise, it's really pushing me over my limit.
Yeah.
But I do quite enjoy the work, and I'm obviously not going to give up the pod. But I have found that like now work is bleeding into the weekend, and not just by a few hours, by like most of the weekend.
Yeah.
So I know it's not sustainable. And I'm trying to, you got any advice from me, Risa, about how I can navigate this?
This is what my new book is all about. So
Perfect.
It's all about balance, really. And I think what you're starting to pick up on are those subtle cues that like, yes, I'm doing this. It's fulfilling. It's exciting. But I do feel that slight tinge of stress creeping in where it's like, I'm never getting that break. I'm never getting that breathing room. So our brains need a balance of fun and focus and rest and play each week. And I think it's compartmentalizing each of those so that when it comes to the weekend, what does your brain need more of? Like right now, what does your brain need more of on the weekend? Do you need more rest? Do you need fun? What do you think? What are you feeling? It sounds like it's heavy on focus right now. So it probably needs more of the other things.
Yeah. More time to see my friends and, dare I say, go on some dates.
So maybe we need to leave like a Sunday or Saturday and that's just all you're doing, and we protect it more. We guard it and say, this is this time, because I'm starting to get way tipped over. And if my brain doesn't get those things, what happens is, like you said before, we do have a tendency to get sick or to get stressed out or to start having that anxiety slowly build underneath the surface. And then it kind of comes out through the body before we can even understand, you know, where did all this come from? There were those little signs the whole time building, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm struggling with a bit of guilt as well, because with the new company, I didn't realize, because I'm used to being freelance more than working for a company, that, you know, I do struggle with micromanaging. Yeah. But then I enjoy it. And I've also agreed to a 6 months, you know, a commitment. So I'm just, oh my God, I'm a few weeks in. What am I going to do here?
So many of my clients doing this. I think when a new opportunity hits, we get so excited, and our excitement turns into kind of like a people pleasing. Like we want to show off everything we can do and be the best of ourselves, which is a good intention. But sometimes it tips us too far, too fast. And we set the expectations so high from the get-go that it becomes impossible to maintain that over time. So I always encourage my high achieving clients to, you know, ramp up slowly, you know, don't hit the ground at 100 miles an hour, because then you're setting yourself up. They're always going to expect that, you know, we got to go slow and like show them we're learning the skills at a reasonable rate, you know?
Yeah. On hindsight, I should have maybe asked them as well, could I do X amount of days rather than X amount of days, rather than just accepting this was what given. Yeah. That's
that's a good point. Like advocating for yourself ahead of time, knowing your tendencies, which we all have, right? Like, how can we ask for what we need in the beginning before it gets out of control? As you've been talking to experts all over the world about happiness and wellness and balance, what are some things you've learned over the last year from doing your podcast and your journalism?
Oh my gosh. So much. I mean, the most recent one, it was looking at the psychology behind our financial behaviors with a wonderful lady called Vicky Raynor, who's wrote this book, Money on My Mind. And I had no idea, although it makes all the sense, about like how emotionally loaded money is.
Yeah.
It's also really symbolic. Yeah. And when you start to look at like impulse spending, what void are you trying to fill?
It's all emotional, really. Our relationships and money.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of the most emotionally triggered subjects out there, I think.
Yeah. And like the shopping addiction, it is so similar to having any other kind of addiction, I guess, like, you know, alcohol or smoking or eating or whatever the addiction is. It's the same kind of pattern of like I know I shouldn't be doing it, but there's the thrill of kind of doing it, even though I know I shouldn't be doing it. I know it's not good for me. And then there's the guilt afterwards, especially if you couldn't afford to purchase what you
spending too much or making questionable purchases you didn't really need. Because a lot of us are doing it to relieve stress. I think the main thing running through all that is the stress is so high. And if we're not regulating it in different ways, it's going to come out in shopping sometimes, or in buying things, or trying to fill with stuff,
Yeah. And how it can be used as a manipulation tactic as well. It's
instead of meeting people's emotional needs, we buy things sometimes too,
compensate.
Yeah,
that's a really big one. Gosh, loneliness as well, as it just seems to be coming up.
People seem to feel more disconnected than ever. I mean, that's kind of what I'm hearing from a lot of people.
Yeah, because we're so connected digitally, I think somehow there's some weird imbalance, isn't there?
Yeah, we've lost the skills to connect in person, perhaps.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you bring those two things up, loneliness and money, because I think it all ties back to the theme, which is hustle culture, right? And a lot of that is driven by, why do we become workaholics? Why do we become addicted to work? Well, sometimes we don't want to feel the feelings underneath that are lurking. It's like, if I stay busy, I don't have to feel lonely. I don't have to feel broke. I don't have to feel disconnected, because work is sort of the mask I'm wearing to avoid dealing with those things. And the problem is, eventually all these feelings come out and your body shuts down, and then it all happens all at once. Now you're feeling sick, and you're also feeling all the wave of emotion you've been suppressing. So how can we deal with this on a more weekly basis so it doesn't kind of erupt in this big, explosion of things where we just get completely shut down emotionally, physically, and mentally?
Well, I think being aware of it is the first step, and it's an important step, because like we chatted about my new gig, and I'm a few weeks in, and I'm so aware that I can't sustain this. And I know what will happen if I don't make some changes. So, I think being aware of it, because then it doesn't leave your mind until you've solved it. It is something that's just pecking at the head, isn't it? Kind of thing. It won't go away. I mean, for me, my godsend is yoga.
Yeah. Well, that makes you aware, and it brings you back into your body, which I think people need to do, because sometimes we're too in our head when we're getting into like an overly busy mode. It's all in the brain, and we're starting to ignore the body, and that separation gets bigger and bigger. And that's where the anxiety kicks in. Like, whoa, this divide is getting too huge. So maybe for you, yoga is the way you integrate those two back together and bring your brain back home to your body, and really get into, what is my body feeling? How do I calm down? What's internally going on.
Definitely. When I experience a great yoga class with a brilliant teacher that gets me out of my head, because I'm concentrating on what I'm doing physically, I just think that is, for me, that is just like heaven to have that peace. I went to India for 9 weeks of yoga teacher training, and it was very disciplined from morning till evening, and very like modest, humble accommodation. But it was the most content I've ever been in my life. And I didn't have access to a TV in my room. Wi-Fi was very patchy and didn't work so much. So I was very disconnected in that way, but I was so connected to the people I was studying with, the teachers, the amazing animals that were swinging off the trees, and just taking away the hustle culture actually was like,
it's like freedom.
Yeah.
We forget that we can pull out of the matrix, and it feels good. It feels more centered. It feels more simple and grounded, And sometimes it takes an extreme situation like that, where everything is taken away. We can zap back into remembering that that's how it feels. Like, it's a good feeling.
Yeah. And then ultimately it does make you more focused and productive, and all of the other things which are great for the work side too.
It's interesting, because when we slow down on purpose and kind of simplify things down to, what can I handle? What needs to get done today, and what can I leave behind and leave out of the scenario? It actually makes us more effective at managing our time than doing it the other way, where it's like busy, 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 which often just leads us into such a stressed out state. We don't get hardly anything done as a result.
Yeah. And boundaries, I think, would be the only other thing I'd add to that. I'm working on friends, family, myself, work colleagues is intersected.
We all have such limited time and energy. And I think when we appreciate that and start acknowledging it, we can decide what we're bringing in and keeping out on a more regular basis and clear some space for calm to naturally occur.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun hearing about your adventures. Where can people find you?
Well, I mean, I'd love people to check out the My Possible Self app, and the podcast is a weekly podcast, which is called the Happier Life Project, which is available on the My Possible Self app, which is completely free to download, as we talked about earlier. And then, on Instagram, I'm at Radio Gabby. I'm also active on at My Possible Self, which is the app's Instagram page too.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been great. Therapy.
Good. And I hope everyone out there takes a little breather to slow down on purpose and think about what's important to you and where you're getting off balance this week and what your brain and body need more of. Thanks so much, Gabby.
Thank you. It's Gabby back with you. Thank you again to Risa Williams for having me on your fabulous podcast, The Motivation Mindset, and for letting me share the interview on this one. And thank you to you, my friend, for listening to this episode of the Happier Life Project podcast. Risa's book, Get Stuff Done Without Stress, 5 Secrets for Making the Best Use of Your Time and Achieving Your Goals for Greater Happiness, is out now. And it's super, super worth you picking up a copy. Now for the important housekeeping, and then I'll sign off. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. If you are in crisis or you think you may have an emergency, please do call your doctor or the emergency services immediately. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the interviewer and the interviewees. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a substitute for professional or medical advice. Our partners at the Priory Healthcare are not involved in the production or content of this podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please do subscribe and leave a review if you're listening on one of the podcast platforms. And to find and follow us on social media, we are most active, as you probably know by now, on Instagram, and you can find us at My Possible Self, and I've been at Radio Gabby. Do take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.